As the internet has allowed for niches to sustain themselves healthily while also crossing into the mainstream, a reverence for weird, obscure but genuine creations has emerged. As such, odd experimental pieces of art have become more viable as they can be spread at no cost of the creator, but none of this takes away from that feeling of discovering something weird and wonderful all on your own. In terms of video games, finding ridiculous kinda shitty titles has become easier and easier thanks to the lack of standards storefronts like Steam have. So although you can quickly find stuff that is weird and obscure, that sense of honesty is a lot tougher to come by. Perhaps looking in front of us isn't the best way to go. Maybe looking back will prove more worthwhile. That's where LSD Dream Emulator comes in. LSD Dream Emulator is a walking simulator from the PS1 where you explore surreal, dreamlike environments. You play through days, where you amble through absurd and strange dream worlds, just taking in what you can. LSD was the brainchild of Osamu Sato, a Japanese artist who's worked on music, video games, art books, exhibitions, and some video stuff. Sato had no interest in video games, but instead the prospect they presented, of creating unique, interactable contemporary art. He wished to create a nonsense world that the player could explore and interpret, with no actionable objectives, which ends up giving the player a position of objectivity, as your insights and thoughts about LSD aren't shaped by what you're supposed to do. To begin building this world, he referenced a dream diary kept by a game designer Asmic Ace Entertainment, who developed and published the game. Upon release in 1998 it sold poorly, and there was no intention from the publisher to localize the game for foreign markets. In 2010 it was released on the PlayStation Store, and over time has built a dedicated following on the internet. And that makes complete sense. It's like the perfect game for the internet to love. Most importantly, it's not very well known, so you can easily gain a sense of superiority for knowing about it before other people. It also has that genuine intent that I mentioned earlier. It released in a time where to actually sell a video game a notable investment had to be made, so only stuff with a sense of purpose, whether that was to the market or to a creator/audience, really got made and distributed. And finally, it came out at just the right time. Those PS1 graphics are slowly becoming more in style again over the last few years, and stuff like the pixelated textures and view fog adds to the game's atmosphere and mystery. I thought it would be interesting to explore such a strange game and try to derive some meaning and analysis out of it. So, let's give it a go. I first played LSD around 2018 or 2019, intrigued by the premise and imagery. I was initially wary. The name LSD made me wonder if it was simply trying to be trippy for the sake of it, in which case it would have been squandering the potential it had to be something more poignant. But that's not really what I found, I think. I found the different worlds drew me in, and I explored with both an excitement and hesitation. The imagery and textures were odd but not random, and there was evidence of life at different points. This world did have a breath, and I was keen to find out what it would say once it had taken a deep one. After 3 or 4 hours though, my enthusiasm waned. The total lack of objective, combined with the fact that I was regularly finding myself in almost identical worlds, really made me question the prospect of further investment. Was there going to be something more, or had I really seen all there was? The thing is, I didn't really have a way of finding out. I felt the mystery of the game was one of its strengths, so I was reticent to do some searching on the internet to find an answer. And in terms of what the game tells you, well, I didn't have a clue. The game is in Japanese after all, and beyond the scant knowledge I'd retained from 2 years of learning the language in high school, I didn't know what information it was volunteering. Now, the game isn't filled with text. There's really not much at all. But for all I knew, it could have been providing pieces of context that would be vital to deriving some more purpose from the playing experience. So I stopped after those first few hours, happy with the time I spent with it, but disappointed I didn't feel compelled to spend some more. And so that's why I was interested in doing this video. What meaning and concepts could I extract from something that is so open to interpretation? But in doing a small bit of research, I discovered an English fan translation had been finished in 2020. Now I still could analyze the Japanese version, but there was so little text that I felt a translation would provide me with a firmer base without removing that objectivity the player has. So with all that covered, let's dive into LSD Dream Emulator. That intro sequence is a pretty good microcosm of the game as a whole, overwhelming, intriguing, and begging for a closer look. You play through days, each one randomly taking you to a dream world. You typically start a day in this building looking kinda like an apartment complex or something of that nature. You can explore this building but will be taken to a dream world once making contact with some entity or object. Birds chirp outside the building, which to me speaks to a level of atmosphere and secondary detail that dreams often don't have. We, or at least I, don't tend to remember smaller touches, instead hanging on to the impactful imagery. Walking around, you'll start to digest the controls. You use the D-pad for movement and turning, you can strafe left or right with the triggers, look behind you with the bumpers, look up or down with square and triangle, and sprint with the X button. There's no thumbstick support, so it's certainly something to get used to, but the controls are impressively comprehensive for the time. Sprinting helps you get to points of interest faster, and strafing allows you to keep your focus on an object while circling around it. They are sluggish, but you'll adapt soon enough, finding yourself combining these movement options to find all the angles you need thanks to the controls being designed specifically for observation. Now the frame rate. It fluctuated while playing but was consistently pretty low, maybe in the early to mid 20s. I'm pretty sure this is a fault of the game's optimization, because I've emulated and recorded other PS1 games without a problem, and this volatile frame rate was still there when I had every other program closed and was only running the emulator. I've cut around it as best I can, so hopefully your eyes have been spared of the pain. On the first day I was taken to this town. There's larger communal buildings and spaces for sculptures. The music sings away as percussion rattles around it. The velocity of these drums changes to make it seem like it's reverberating around the world and not through your headphones. This place feels empty and the ground is this dead grass / sandy texture. Your footprints sound a bit dampened, informing us that something with some softness and sponginess is under our feet. Due to their pixelated nature, the textures are all very gritty and rough, giving them a sense of abrasion and wariness. True to the PS1, polygons warp and distort as your perspective relative to them changes, which adds to the oddity of the game, as though your perception of these places is forever altering. Taking all these details into account, a pretty rich and engrossing atmosphere is crafted. It's impressive for the first time and did a great job of drawing me in. After exploring for a short while, I come across two people. One is small and the other large, looking like a mother and daughter perhaps. They appear ghostly and have no response to my following of them. All I've been driven by is my own curiosity. There is no outside force pushing me where to go, only my innate desire to try and make some sense of what is happening. This reveals the relationship that the game builds with the player. Big picture decisions like the content of Dreamscapes are made for you, but you're left to your own devices to dictate the small stuff. The two figures head for a tunnel leading to another world, and maybe that's where everyone else in this world went, leaving the town abandoned. I followed them through. I come back to in some sort of industrial area. It's a bleak environment that is incredibly isolating. All you can hear is the waves lapping against the concrete in your own footsteps, a firm reminder that it's just you and the empty expanse of the ocean. A few warehouses sit side by side. I enter the farthest one and all I find is a pool of blood and a chalk outline. There is an implication of violence, and an acknowledgement of it thanks to the chalk, but seemingly no attempt to do anything about it, nothing indicating that there's any sort of investigation. The violence is noted, but not dwelled on. As I stare at the ground before me, the dream ends. I have no idea what just happened, but it was pretty evocative. After the dream ends, it's charted here. This attempts to map all the different days, with a placement depending on the content of the dream. The chart will slowly fill up as days go by. After the charting, you're back to the main menu and ready to start the next day. Day 2 is just a quote. The street is a deep river. The water came up to my chest. I find a small frog and try to catch it. I'm squeezing its soft body, but the disgusting feeling woke me up. This is stated, not experienced, like the previous dream, and is charted as purely neutral, as though you have no connection to it. On the third day I'm interrupted by some flying creature, making contact and teleporting me away. I'm now in these temple grounds leading to a gaping hole in the center. I looked around trying to get my bearings when I see a larger version of the creature that sent me here flying towards me. I was startled, so I panicked, walking backwards and plummeting down into the void. LSD does get legitimately blood pumping. There's so much potential that I found myself regularly surprised at what I was faced with, speaking to the game's ability to get you invested. Things often sprung out of nowhere, so getting caught off guard is pretty easy. After exploring the industrial area and now falling to my death, it would be alluring to call the game dark or depressing. The idea of finding this obscure Japanese game that explores the depressive mind state of someone through their dreams is very romantic, but it wouldn't be accurate. LSD Dream Emulator is truthfully quite whimsical and cheerful. The time of its production is no doubt working against it, the pixelation and view fog making everything look harsh and decrepit, but much of the imagery is colourful and upbeat. I'm now in this Japanese temple, quickly being hounded by a hound and taken to the same world as the previous day, but this time at night, and with a floating elephant for some reason. Control is consistently taken from you to build a sense of hierarchy. You are just visiting someone else's creations, so when the game is bored of you being in one place, it spawns a dog in front of you to take you somewhere else. I travel through a nearby tunnel to find myself in front of what I think is a sumo ring. Accidentally bumping into a wall, I'm pulled back to the town, this time with blue fog. The music is noisier, more metallic and mechanical. I come across a humanoid head on a wall. The game has made me prudent in my interaction as I slowly approach the face in the hope of it not racing towards me and ending the dream. It doesn't do that, it just shoots some kanji out its mouth and fucks off into the sky. To the game's credit, you do come across at least one thing to stare at each day, which sustains that curiosity that serves as the driving motivation for continued engagement. And this is pretty much the game. The way I've talked through LSD so far maybe seems very tangential, and that's reflective of the experience. You just go through days and dreams looking for something new as you please. There's no deeper interaction than bumping into something or being attacked by something, and not all that much tying the whole thing together. Before I diverge a bit and try and get deeper, I want to go over a few more days and put into words the reaction I had to it all. After being mauled by a teddy bear while staring at a TV showing an angle of the building I was standing in but covered with blood and crude drawings, I was dumped in the most blatantly surreal world yet. It's the recesses of the other dream worlds, like there's been a memory leak and the game is dumping all the unintelligible drivel here. It speaks in symbols and garish colours and the music incessantly plays, frustratingly finding no other place to go. It's just this one tiny loop again and again, which does actually sound like a bunch of objects tumbling over each other, like they're being dumped out. It's curious but nonsensical. The sound of your footsteps give no indication of the texture or material makeup of this place. It's honestly pretty compelling. This is where some of that whimsy comes from. I ran around this place excitably and soaked in whatever I could find. The other worlds feel like they're trying to craft a more distinct aura, but this one feels free from those constraints. There are some ribbons of light through the sky and it was genuinely quite beautiful. The game generously offers up wallpaper moments to reward your exploration, and I found myself trying to frame these landmarks in favourable ways. I had no intention of using them as wallpapers, but I relished doing it anyway. I'm arbitrarily taken to another point in this dreamscape and suddenly that energetic mood is gone. The music is now in contradiction. The xylophone type sounds are tinny and childish, but the drawn out synths are strung along with intent, coming off more mature. I dawdled along now, taking in my whole surroundings instead of fixating on a single object. What's so impressive about this is it's all random. The music is often the primary measurement of tone, giving it power over what taste is established. These random events regularly coalesce to create something digestible. It's not all just silliness. There's a versatility captured by all the assets that allows them to work under a wide set of conditions, representing the well thought out approach, which is refreshing as randomness in games can often feel like a lazy solution to creating quote unquote new content. On day 7 I came to in a rocky plain, not the usual building. At the top of a hill a window opens up and I'm entranced by it. I'm now in this void, standing atop a cube while others float in the surrounding space. I wondered if the grayscale colour scheme was to indicate a memory, a biographical dream as opposed to a fictional one. A child is playing with a hoop and stick and runs out over the immensity of the void with no hesitation. What is this? Is it a memory being forgotten, leaving the tunnel and venturing out into nothingness? I honestly don't know, but it was a little emotional. I guess it's a representation of what dreams can be. Among all the absurdity, this sticks in my mind because it's more true. It sits in visual contrast and is a more relatable situation, just playing as a kid. Its simplicity and authenticity is striking. I kept progressing. Oh, well, not really, I just kept experiencing stuff. I found someone lying in a hospital bed in the apartment building, I saw a trippy train, dancing flowers, had a man in a trench coat follow me, saw bulls roaming the streets on their hind legs, got a brilliant view of the moon, some big baby headbutted me I think, and then I found myself in the industrial district again. All this odd stuff and everything I've talked about above happened within like 45 minutes. On one hand, that's great, the game wasn't disrespecting my time, but on the other, I was finding myself in the same worlds again and again. Things do change. The village is empty one night and littered with bulls the next, but these changes never seem to have much function and are at times shallow enough to have you wanting to just move on. You can decide to move on, just bump into something or go through a tunnel and you can start another day or emerge into a different world, but that same issue applies to every major area in the game. On top of this, interaction and agency never deepens. As I said, you can bump into stuff or have stuff bump into you. New objects lose their appeal when you know there's nothing to do but stare at them. The objects themselves can be intriguing, but many are pretty mundane and not worth investigating. Then there's the chart. It doesn't make sense. There is some scant logic to it. A dream in the industrial area will pretty reliably chart as a downer, which is understandable, but static and dynamic? I couldn't discern a pattern. To me it would track if dreams with more moving entities would measure as more dynamic, but they barely do. I'd be curious to see what a purely dynamic dream would look like, because the ones that I felt had the most going on barely skewed one way or the other. And there may be some rules I'm just not gleaning, but you can only discover them through trial and error, and when the interaction is as minimal as it is, the impetus to do that just isn't there. For me at least. This is a big blow to the game because the only thing slightly resembling an objective is filling that chart up. It is some marker of progression. But when the task of filling in the squares on the chart presents itself, it feels insurmountable. As I realized this, I was kinda sad. I think this game is so unique, and its potential is massive, so to see it fall short and begin to bore me really sucked. I said previously that I was moving through the game tangentially, taking whatever path was laid before me. Osamu Sato saw this as an opportunity to create interactive art, so why not instead move forward with the goal of truly analysing these areas one at a time, to establish what the idea behind each seems to be. Let's start off with the town. This area is filled with these large dwellings that seem to follow more traditional Japanese architecture. You can enter some of these homes, but they're all empty. The ground is covered in compacted, dead grass with the exception of some of the small elevated areas which usually feature one object at the centre, whether a stone sculpture of a hand greeting you or a tree beginning to grow back. There's a distinct divide in the town thanks to a stream of water and some bridges. Crossing over, you'll see densely packed houses, these ones being smaller and more individualistic. The homes on the other side of town were abandoned but not compromised, but these ones are falling into despair, with boarded up windows and cracks in the surrounding ground. This more modern approach to infrastructure has begun to drift into the more traditional half of the town, with what may be apartment blocks or office buildings. That change may have been the catalyst for the collapse of the town, with it faltering in the face of change and eventually becoming a ghost town. So does this whole area represent change and the associated feelings and reactions that come with it? If we take a look at the different scenarios we've seen this area in, we can understand what those reactions are. We've seen it completely empty, ceasing to operate in reaction to change. We've seen people fleeing from it, fearing change, and we've seen bulls roaming the streets with a red sky, showing what this change could do to this place. I don't think there's any explicit narrative here, but rather a visualization of how dreams can manifest and mirror our lives, with this example covering change. Then we come to the industrial area. This entire space reeks of isolation. It feels lifeless and unremarkable, making the mundane stick out more. You pay greater attention to those small things, mirroring the introspection that can come with loneliness, having no one but yourself to talk to, feeling like an outsider or an observer, not a participant. The imagery is taken from the cold, lifeless industrial and corporate world, capturing the feeling of having your life leached away from you, at the end of it being sent off to spend the remainder of your day recovering so you can come back and do it all again tomorrow. The other signs of life we do see, like the dead bodies, smashed cars and graffiti, can speak to how we treat ourselves when we're lonely, neglecting our own health and turning others away as social interaction becomes more and more foreign. I think this ancient temple area is an example of discovery and adventure, the fact that dreams have the power to take you anywhere. You can see these sort of ancient rock structures that aren't too dissimilar to previous real-world civilizations, combined with these strange creatures that aren't all that well defined, the merging of real and fake, of imported and imagined. It could be a translation of gaining a sense of freedom, maybe monetary freedom or becoming more independent, feeling like the world is sincerely open to you now. There's two places that feel connected, but I'm not certain if they are connected geographically. The field and meadow. They're more open-ended and expansive than other locations and give this impression of peace and quiet. There are lions that just stroll past you, streams that calmly run by you, and at times no music at all. It's a deep, restful sleep, the perfect end to a productive and enjoyable day. Finally, the nonsense world. To me, this represents everything at once, mashing it all together to form something that is simultaneously out of this world and very human. It sticks out the most as being crafted by people. There's no attempt at immersion, it's blatantly illogical to strip away the pretense of these being actual places. That approach and distinction makes it the most pure. We're contradictory and complex. This place is a culmination of the human experience, but it's a culmination with constraints, leading to concepts, ideas, and feelings being forced to interact in such ways that they end up forming something ludicrous, something garish and strange, but something with humanity. These places all work together to form a broad display of human emotions and experiences, being expressed across a diverse set of landscapes. Taking a closer look did add some of that sense of purpose that I said was lacking in LSD Dream Emulator, but what this did cause me to do was just get impatient. The randomness of the game meant that if I was looking for a specific area, I just had to hope that I would eventually end up there, and so my patience wore thin. Now this more analytical, logical approach to the game is not what was intended, and that's not just backed up by the game's structure and mechanics, but some supplemental material as well. On release, a limited edition set of the game came with a CD of music and a book titled Lovely Sweet Dream, featuring the contents of the dream journal that LSD was based off, along with accompanying art for each dream. Lovely Sweet Dream hasn't been translated, but the majority of the dreams are already presented in Japanese and English, so the book is very much worth going through even as a fan who doesn't speak Japanese. I don't have a copy because any official physical products related to LSD Dream Emulator are quite expensive these days, but I do have a scan of the book. So let's virtually flip through and see what we can gather from it. The book opens with blocks of text and screenshots of the game interspersed. There are different explanations for the acronym of LSD that look to cover the potential of human emotion. The in blank appears to be a setup for the next two words, presenting an emotion, in laughter, and following that emotion up with an accompanying character that would explain it, the spiritual dream. This is consistent with the chart's effort to measure the impression different dreams will have on the player. The introduction of the book is purposefully sparse. It contrasts the chaos of the preceding pages with the increased kerning of the type, leaning into that spacier, relaxed feel. The book follows a simple but effective structure. Each double-page spread is dedicated to a dream. The left page of the spread features the art, and the right features the dream with a few graphical elements. There's a clear distinction between dreams, allowing each one to stand on its own. This same contrast of complexity and simplicity that was found in the first few pages runs through the rest of the book. Beyond the size constraints of the page, it appears artists have been given free rein with what they create, as art styles vary and change constantly, no two feeling alike. Very few of the interpretations are literal, upholding the dedication the game has to more building a mood and feeling than a digestible picture. It displays the absurdity of dreams, but also the specificity with which details of a dream can sit in our mind. The descriptions of the dreams make no effort to establish logic or form, they are simply presented as they were remembered, much like the game itself. The second dream in the journal is about the video of a child eating that you could encounter in the game. I speculated that it was a dream revolving around a misremembered memory, with some details staying intact and others being changed, like the kid drinking wine, and some being ignored totally, like what the wall behind the kid looked like. The description and insights I just gave about it don't match up with what's here. There's clear liberties being taken with the source material. Any sense of context has been stripped away in the translation to the game, removing it from attaining a feeling of progress. The dream itself is still very strange, but thanks to the text medium there's descriptive language used to give you an indication as to what's important and what isn't. It's been made more obtuse in the game, staying true to that product's intentions. This contrast between the left and right page allows the different content to be obviously related without being completely dependent on each other. You can see a further dedication to impact and imagery as you keep turning the pages. The descriptions of dreams will often have graphical elements running below them that makes the text harder to read, forcing the reader to make irregular adjustments, staggering the reading process. Some of the art is of its time, like crude 3D models, editing of photos in much the same way some memes are made, and pixelated graphics which focus on being an outsider, as though predicting that many kids who didn't fit in would turn to the internet to find a sense of belonging. Across the whole thing, there's actually a semblance of continuity. The person keeping this journal will reference real-life events seeping into their dreams, and will speak of coming across places from other dreams. I've read that journaling dreams like this can improve your ability to recall and remember them, so I wonder if this was a result of that process, and maybe that was carried over to the game by allowing you to explore the same locations but with different details. Overall, Lovely Sweet Dream acts as a great companion to LSD, and is a rewarding read after playing the game as you can recognise certain dreams and gain a new perspective on them. You can see the rationale behind how they adapted the dreams to create something that stands on its own, not relying on having the person who lived these dreams dictate them to you. At the end, Hiroko Nishikawa, the author of the Dream Diary, gives a message. It ends like this. The dreams as reconstructed by the artists who read them are different as well, and those are what are presented here. This is not just an ordinary dream diary, but is an entirely new dreamscape. Don't try to analyse them or read too much into them. Just enjoy this book as if walking through a dream. That's why the game's systems were resisting my urge to analyse locations one by one. It was built to accommodate the exact opposite approach. My winding tangential process of earlier was the intended one. Because of this, I'm not going to pick out every single detail and find some meaning or reason for it. I think that would be against the spirit of the game. That does beg the question though, shouldn't an analysis of this game even exist if the process of creating one would involve disrespecting the game's ambitions? Osamu Sato saw this as an opportunity to create contemporary art. Contemporary art is generally characterized by its lack of principle and distinguishable themes or consistent parts, and it being made today. It's meant to push boundaries and be just what it is, striving to be relevant to just itself, but in the process becoming part of something larger than itself, the whole denomination of contemporary art. LSD Dream Emulator inhabits this to an excellent degree, taking advantage of the interactive experience by having the art craft itself randomly out of pre-designed parts. Its existence is ever-changing and so far removed from its contemporaries, other video games and other pieces of art, that it becomes in a sense a culmination of contemporary art. It means only to have no meaning, causing its meaning to be a lack thereof and becoming indecipherable. Its intentions transform and become individual, as no two experiences will really be alike. There is interactive contemporary art already. The act of pacing around an installation to digest it from different angles and perspectives is interaction, and it will shape your thoughts about that piece of art. But LSD Dream Emulator lets you embody the art, become an active participant in its construction. LSD sees the potential video games hold for artistic expression and evolution, and saw that potential over 20 years ago. So as I said, is this analysis even valid? Is there a point in examining this in any depth, seeing as the message of Lovely Sweet Dream asked us not to think too hard about it all? Well, although there's not really any overarching narrative threads to follow, there still is the experience of playing it. Contemporary art is meant to evolve and change. It begs to be the one that is now and could only exist now. So although it seems to have no defined meaning, in LSD whatever is there is ultimately assisted by the player. The player will still get impressions, still have their own thoughts, so I'm going to keep mine as they are so far. This probably seems very strange, but as I thought of the game and tried to decipher it, I had a bit of a crisis, wondering if it really mattered or could actually be done. And it's interesting that a game can do that. LSD Dream Emulator doesn't feel inspired by contemporary art, it just is contemporary art. And that stands out in the realm of video games, because many of the games we tend to praise as legitimately artistic are often emulating the techniques and ground covered by more traditional mediums. LSD is the result of an artist creating a game that isn't a game. There's no concern for game feel, for defined objectives or a digestible narrative. It breaks the rules with no shame because it didn't care to know about them in the first place. I'm going to leave my analysis as it is at the moment. I really respect LSD Dream Emulator as a piece of interactive art, and so I don't want to tear it to pieces looking for some meaning that isn't even there, because all that's going to do is destroy the experience for myself and someone else. That's not to say that those who do enjoy combing through to find connections are playing the game wrong. It's ultimately your decision, and there's absolutely nothing bad about playing a game the way you want to. LSD Dream Emulator is a weird game to talk about. It's more fascinating than fun and harbours some missed opportunities that you can't really blame it for, because it was pretty ahead of its time. A more concerted effort to incorporate narrative elements really could have done well in holding a player's attention longer, but the fact that a walking simulator was released 15 years before the term was really a thing shows how working outside the boundaries that may have nudged them to develop a story ultimately led to a totally unique experience. It also benefited from releasing at the right place at the right time. It wasn't successful on launch, but if it had have been released even a generation later with a full localization, it wouldn't have nearly the same value and intrigue that it inherits thanks to its Japan-only status and wonky, eerie PS1 visuals. LSD does emulate dreams pretty well, creating imagery that's made up of familiar parts to create a foreign whole, and serving moments that will stick with you vividly, imparting that same feeling of what the fuck was that all about that you sometimes get after a particularly strange dream. It's managed to inspire whole game jams dedicated to creating like-minded games, and a fan remake/modernization has been in the works for a while. LSD's ability to craft such a diverse set of emotions, moods, and images is remarkable, even more so when the heavy amount of randomness the game is dictated by is taken into account. Most of all, LSD Dream Emulator is a brilliant piece of cutting-edge contemporary art, which succeeds in forging a personal relationship with the viewer as they instead become the catalyst for this piece of art's construction and execution. I encourage you all to give it a go. Your experience will no doubt be different than mine, so don't worry about having been spoiled, because I could never know what your playthrough would be like. Thank you for taking some time to watch this video. I know it's a bit different to my analysis videos, but LSD resists a more structured, detailed analysis and instead calls for something a bit more restrained. I have a Twitter now, you can follow that if you wanna, I suppose. I've actually been using it, and it's a good place to get some insight on any upcoming videos that I have in the works. Thanks for all the support and any comments or whatever that you may leave, and yeah, thanks again for watching.